He signed the divorce papers with a mocking smirk on his face until the judge began reading my late father's will out loud. The courtroom fell completely silent except for the faint sound of papers rustling. Across from me sat my husband, Elias, looking sharp in his perfectly tailored navy blue suit, his hair slicked back, that arrogant grin never leaving his lips. He truly believed he had won it all. He thought he understood everything about me, my background, my family, my worth. But the moment the judge unsealed that thick envelope and started reading my father's will, I watched Elias's confidence crumble right before my eyes, like a house made of glass crashing to the floor. Before I proceed, I want you to do me a quick favor. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and drop your country in the comments. I'd love to know where you are listening to me from. My name is Naomi, and this is how I learned that sometimes the people who look down on you the most are the ones closest to your heart. 2 years ago, I was not the same woman sitting in that courtroom. Back then, I was married to Elias, and a high-flying investment banker everyone thought was the perfect man. He was charming, well-spoken, confident, and came from an old, wealthy family. We met at a charity gala in New York City. I was a high school English teacher then, barely surviving paycheck to paycheck after losing my dad the previous year. Elias swept me off my fate with grand gestures, lavish dinners, surprise gifts, and romantic trips. It all felt like something straight out of a fairy tale. 3 months after we met, he got down on one knee with a diamond ring that probably cost more than I earned in an entire year. I said yes without thinking twice. I thought I had found my forever person, my Prince Charming. But fairy tales, as I would soon learn, don't always end with happily ever after. At first, the cracks were tiny. Elias would tease me about my job, calling it cute that I wanted to teach kids. He'd laugh when I told him about my students' achievements, as if their success meant nothing compared to his business victories. When I mentioned wanting to go back to school to get a master's degree and maybe become a principal someday, he'd smile, pat me gently on the head, and say, "Why go through all that stress, Naomi? I can take care of both of us." At first, I thought he was just being sweet and protective. I didn't realize he was being controlling. After our wedding, the comments turned sharper, more frequent. He often hosted dinner parties for his colleagues at our home. Whenever someone asked what I did for a living, Elias would chuckle and say, "Oh, Naomi's just a teacher. She keeps herself busy with that while I handle the real work." The way he said, "just a teacher," stabbed my heart every single time. I started feeling smaller and smaller inside my own house. Whenever I tried joining their conversations about the stock market or politics, Elias would interrupt, smirking, "Darling, let the adults handle this one." His friends would burst into laughter, while I quietly excused myself to the kitchen, swallowing my pride along with my tears. The worst part was how he spoke about my father. My dad passed away from cancer when I was 23. It broke me completely. He wasn't rich or famous, just a humble man who worked as a maintenance supervisor at a small manufacturing plant. But he was kind, decent, and he loved me more than anything in this world. Elias never missed a chance to mock where I came from. He'd say things like, "It's fine that your dad was blue-collar, Naomi. Not everyone can be successful like my family." And whenever I got emotional talking about my dad, he'd sigh impatiently and say, "You need to move on, Naomi. Thinking about the past won't change your background." But my father had taught me something Elias never understood. That a person's value isn't defined by money or titles, but by kindness, integrity, and how they treat others. A year into our marriage, Elias's true nature began to surface. He started staying out late, saying he had important client meetings. His phone buzzed constantly, and he'd grab it fast, walking into another room to answer. When I asked how work was going, his answers grew shorter, colder, vaguer. The romantic surprises stopped. Expensive dinners turned into silent microwaved meals eaten in front of the TV. The man who once couldn't stop holding me barely looked at me anymore. Deep down, I knew something was wrong, but I didn't want to face it. I convinced myself he was just under pressure at work. So I poured all my heart into my teaching. I stayed late after classes, tutoring students, running after school programs, helping kids who had no one else to believe in them. At least at school, I mattered. My students didn't care that I didn't drive a luxury car or live in a mansion. They cared that I listened, that I showed up for them, that I believed in their potential. One student, Nyla, was going through a rough time at home, and her grades were slipping badly. I worked with her for hours every week, guiding her through assignments and encouraging her not to give up. Eventually, Nyla not only passed her exams, she excelled. When she got accepted to her dream college on a full scholarship, she hugged me tightly and said through tears, "Miss Naomi, you changed my life. You never gave up on me when everyone else did." Moments like that reminded me who I really was, beneath all of Elias's insults and dismissive remarks. But at home, I felt invisible. Elias had slowly convinced me that I was lucky to have him, that no one else would ever want a simple teacher from a modest family. He'd say things like, "You should be thankful I saw something in you despite your background." And over time, I started believing him. The breaking point came on a chilly Wednesday evening in April. I had just returned home from a parent-teacher conference, feeling genuinely proud of myself. I'd helped one of my struggling students' parents create a solid plan for his learning progress, and for once, I felt like I had really made a difference. I couldn't wait to share that little victory with Elias. When I walked into the house, I found him sitting comfortably in his study, laughing on the phone. I was about to greet him when I caught the sound of my name, then froze. "Trust me, Derek, she has no idea," Elias said, chuckling. "She's so naive. It's almost adorable. She actually believes I married her for love." He laughed again, a cold, sharp sound that made my stomach twist. "Of course I made her sign a prenup. Do you think I'm stupid? Once we divorce, she'll walk away with nothing, and I'll get everything, including that property her dad left her. She doesn't even realize she signed it over to me as collateral for the mortgage. She has no idea what that really means." I froze in the doorway, my hand trembling on the frame. I could barely breathe. Elias kept talking, his voice dripping with arrogance. "She's been ridiculously easy to manipulate. A few luxury gifts, a few fancy dinners, and she handed over everything without a fight. The best part?" He paused, laughing again. "She still thinks I love her." The man on the other end must have said something funny because Elias laughed louder, then said, "You're right, Derek. I deserve an award for this. 3 years pretending to love someone this dull? It'll all be worth it when I cash out." My heart pounded so violently I thought it might explode. I slowly backed away from the doorway, trying not to make a sound. Suddenly, everything made sense. The late nights, the secret phone calls, the financial papers he pushed in front of me, the sudden coldness. He had planned it all from the very beginning. That night, I lay beside him in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to him breathe peacefully while my whole world was collapsing around me. The man I had loved and trusted had been using me all along. When morning came, Elias behaved like nothing had happened. He leaned down, kissed my forehead, and said softly, "Have a good day at school, sweetheart." His tone was gentle and affectionate. If I hadn't overheard that phone call, I would have believed him again. That day, I called in sick to work, something I never did unless I was seriously ill. I needed time to think, to understand what I'd just discovered. I spent the entire day at the kitchen table surrounded by piles of documents, our mortgage papers, bank statements, insurance files. The more I read, the more my stomach turned. It was all a setup. Over the past 3 years, Elias had gained control over everything I owned. The house, it was in his name only, even though we used my father's land as collateral for the mortgage. Our joint accounts were structured so that he had full access, while I needed his permission to withdraw anything substantial. And buried in all those neatly labeled folders were copies of documents I had signed, thinking they were just standard forms for the house or insurance. But now that I read them closely, I realized they were much more than that. I had unknowingly signed away nearly all my financial rights. A few days later, Elias came home carrying a bouquet of roses and a bottle of red wine. He was unusually sweet, and that alone made my stomach tighten. "Naomi, darling," he said, sitting beside me on the couch, his voice soft and calm. "We need to talk." My heart sank, but I forced myself to sound composed. "About what?" He took both my hands in his and looked at me with that practiced expression, serious, but not unkind. "I've been thinking about us, and I think we both know this marriage isn't working anymore." I stared at him in disbelief. "What do you mean?" He sighed like he was the reasonable one. "Come on, Naomi, we're adults. We've grown apart. We want different things. I think it would be better for both of us if we ended this." "You want a divorce?" I whispered. He nodded slowly, his thumb rubbing over my knuckles in a fake comforting gesture. "I know this is hard, but I've already spoken to my lawyer. We can make it quick and painless. You won't have to deal with legal fees or anything stressful." I clenched my jaw. "How generous of you," I said, barely controlling my anger. If he caught the sarcasm, he ignored it. "I've already had the papers drawn up. It's very straightforward. You'll have enough money to start over, find a nice apartment, maybe go back to school if that's what you want." He pulled out a manila folder from his briefcase and placed it on the coffee table. "All you need to do is sign, and we can both move on." I looked at the folder, my hands trembling slightly. "What about the house?" "Well, technically, it's in my name," he said casually, "and I paid for most of it. But don't worry, I'm not heartless. The settlement includes enough for you to live comfortably somewhere nice." "And my father's land?" I asked, my voice sharp. For a split second, his confident expression faltered, but he quickly covered it with another, practiced smile. "Naomi, we've talked about this before. The land was used as collateral for the mortgage. When we sell the house, we'll need to pay off that debt first. But as I said, the settlement will take care of you." He lied so smoothly, so convincingly, that if I hadn't heard that phone call, I might have believed him. I might have signed those papers thinking he was being fair. But this time, I knew better. "I need some time to think," I said quietly. Elias's smile tightened ever so slightly, but he nodded as if he cared. "Of course, sweetheart, take all the time you need. But my lawyer says the sooner we file, the easier it'll be for both of us." That night, I sat at the dining table with the divorce papers spread in front of me. I read every single line, word for word. As I expected, it was all written to favor him. According to the terms, I would receive a small settlement, just enough to rent a modest apartment for maybe a year or two, if I lived carefully. Meanwhile, Elias would walk away with everything else: the house, the cars, the investments, and yes, even my father's land. The document said the land would be sold to cover the marital debt connected to our mortgage. Any remaining funds from that sale would go to Elias as compensation for his financial contributions during our marriage. I stared at those papers until my eyes blurred with tears. I was about to lose everything. including the last tangible piece of my father that I had left. The next few days were an emotional blur. Anger, heartbreak, fear, they all tangled together inside me. But underneath the pain, something else began to form. Determination. Elias had underestimated me, and I wasn't about to let him destroy me without a fight. So I took a personal day off work and drove to the office of Veronica Hale, a divorce attorney I found through a trusted colleague. Veronica was a straightforward woman in her early 50s, with sharp gray eyes and a calm, confident voice. She listened to everything I told her without interrupting, taking notes as I spoke. When I finished, she leaned back slightly in her chair and said, "Naomi, I'll be honest with you. If you really signed all those documents, this won't be an easy battle. Your husband's lawyers knew exactly what they were doing." My throat tightened. "So what, you're saying I just lose everything?" I asked, blinking back tears. She shook her head. "Not necessarily, but we'll need to be very strategic." She tapped her pen on her notebook and asked, "Tell me about your father's land. You said that's the only thing he left you?" I nodded slowly. "Yes, it's just a piece of empty land with an old barn on it. I never really understood why he bought it. He never used it for anything." Veronica leaned forward, her tone thoughtful. "Naomi, have you ever had that land appraised? Do you know what it's actually worth?" I frowned, shaking my head. "Elias told me it wasn't worth much. That's why he said it was perfect for collateral. He said if we ever defaulted, the bank wouldn't lose much." Veronica's eyes narrowed slightly. "I think we should get that land appraised immediately. And I also want to dig into your father's finances. Sometimes there are surprises." I tilted my head. "What kind of surprises?" She smiled faintly. "You'd be amazed how often people don't realize the full value of their inheritance. Your father might have been more careful with money than you think." I left her office feeling torn between hope and doubt. My father had always been a simple man, honest, hardworking, and humble. He'd worked as maintenance supervisor his entire life, just trying to pay the bills and take care of me. What kind of surprise could Veronica possibly find? A week later, my phone rang while I was grading papers. When I saw Veronica's name, my heart jumped. "Naomi," she said, her voice unusually serious, "you need to sit down for this." I felt my pulse quicken. "Why? What happened?" "I've been researching your father's finances, and there are some things you need to know." "What kind of things?" I asked anxiously. "First, about that land you inherited. It's not just empty property. According to county records, there's a natural gas deposit beneath it. An energy company has been trying to buy mineral rights in that area for over 3 years. My heart started racing. "Wait, what does that mean?" "It means your land is potentially worth millions, Naomi." I was speechless. "But that's not all," Veronica continued. "I also found records of a trust account your father opened before he passed away. It's been sitting untouched because the bank couldn't locate you. Your married name made it hard for them to connect the dots." I blinked, stunned. "A trust account?" "Yes," she said, sounding almost proud for me. "Your father was far more financially wise than anyone realized. He'd been quietly investing for years, small amounts, but with smart choices and compound interest. That trust is now worth over $5 million. I sat down heavily in my chair, my mind spinning. "That's impossible. My dad worked in maintenance his whole life. He lived paycheck to paycheck." Veronica chuckled softly. "He might have lived simply, but clearly he was saving wisely behind the scenes." 3 weeks later, the divorce proceedings officially began. Elias arrived with his expensive legal team, exuding confidence and entitlement. He had hired one of the city's most prestigious law firms, probably believing I couldn't afford competent representation. Throughout the hearing, he kept glancing at me with a mix of pity and smugness, as if he felt sorry for me but also was proud of his own cleverness. During the preliminary hearing, his attorney stood up and said smoothly, "Your Honor, my client has been nothing but generous. He is willing to provide Mrs. Naomi Crest with a fair settlement, even though she contributed very little to the marital assets." Elias nodded along solemnly, his expression carefully composed, the picture of a respectable businessman trying to do right by his less fortunate wife. But what he didn't know was that I had a secret weapon now. Veronica had warned me not to reveal anything about the trust or the land's true value yet. She told me, "Let them think they're winning. When the truth comes out, the shock will hit them twice as hard." So I stayed quiet, calm, patient, and ready for the right moment to turn the entire case upside down. The final hearing was set for a Tuesday morning in late September. Elias arrived dressed to impress, wearing his sharpest navy blue suit, polished shoes that gleamed under the courthouse lights, and that same confident smile he always wore when he thought he had already won. His legal team followed close behind, each carrying thick briefcases stuffed with documents. He was sure today would be nothing more than a formality, a simple division of assets that, in his mind, were mostly his. Judge Helena Ward was presiding over the case, a woman known throughout the county for her fairness and sharp attention to detail. She had little patience for lies, games, or manipulation. The courtroom was quiet as she glanced down at the file in front of her. "We're here today to finalize the divorce between Elias Crest and Naomi Crest," Judge Helena began, her tone firm but even. "I've reviewed the filings and I understand there are a few disputed assets that need clarification." Elias's lawyer rose to speak, straightening his tie. "Your Honor, the disputed assets are minimal. The primary marital properties include the family home and certain investments, all of which were largely funded by Mr. Elias Crest's income. Mrs. Naomi Crest, however, inherited a small parcel of undeveloped land from her late father. That land was used merely as collateral for the couple's home mortgage." The judge nodded slightly. "And what is your client's position regarding this land?" The lawyer continued. "Given that it was tied to the marital mortgage, Mr. Elias Crest believes it should be sold to satisfy the outstanding debt and any leftover proceeds divided appropriately between the parties." The judge turned her gaze toward me. Her voice softened slightly. "Mrs. Naomi, how do you respond to this?" I rose to my feet, my palms sweating, heart pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. "Your Honor," I began, steadying my breath, "there are some details about my inheritance that haven't been presented yet." Veronica, standing confidently beside me, took a small step forward. "Your Honor, we have additional information about Mrs. Naomi's inheritance that we believe is crucial to these proceedings." Elias frowned, confusion flickering across his face. His attorney leaned toward him, whispering something quickly. But Elias simply shrugged, still appearing smug and self-assured. "Proceed," Judge Helena said. Veronica calmly opened her leather briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. The sound of paper filled the room as she laid out several documents on the table. "Your Honor, Mrs. Naomi's late father, Frankie Porter, left her two significant assets. The first is the land in question, which, according to recent geological surveys, sits directly on top of a major natural gas deposit. The property has now been appraised at $14 million. The color instantly drained from Elias's face. His pen slipped from his fingers and hit the table with a soft clatter. Veronica continued without missing a beat. "The second asset is a trust fund established by Mr. Porter before his death, specifically designed to remain separate from any marital property. That trust contains more than $5 million. Judge Helena raised her eyebrows slightly, surprised but composed. Mr. Elias Crest, were you aware of the actual value of these assets? His lawyer leaned close, whispering rapidly, but Elias just stammered, visibly shaken. No, Your Honor, I had no idea. Veronica's expression turned firm. Your Honor, we have evidence that Mr. Elias may have attempted to fraudulently obtain control of these assets. The courtroom rustled. Veronica reached into her folder again and placed copies of emails and voice recordings on the judge's desk. We have proof that Mr. Elias Crest knew his wife, Naomi, was entitled to a significant inheritance. He deliberately hid this information while manipulating her into signing documents that would have given him control of those assets. Elias finally found his voice. That's a lie! I didn't know anything about that land, I swear! Veronica remained composed. Your Honor, we have a recorded phone conversation where Mr. Elias explicitly discusses his plan to use the divorce to gain ownership of his wife's inherited property. Judge Helena's face hardened. Her tone turned icy. Mr. Elias, is it true you attempted to gain access to assets that legally belong to your wife? His lawyer stood up quickly, panic creeping into his voice. Your Honor, we request additional time to review this new evidence. But Judge Helena shook her head firmly. No, we're resolving this today. Her gavel tapped once. Mrs. Naomi, the court recognizes that both the land and the trust fund are your separate property. They will remain entirely in your possession. She turned sharply toward Elias. Mr. Elias, I am deeply troubled by what I've heard today. The evidence suggests you intentionally tried to defraud your wife of her rightful inheritance. Elias's voice cracked as he tried to speak. Your Honor, please, there's been a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding was your wife believing you married her out of love instead of greed. The room fell utterly silent. Mrs. Naomi Crest, the judge continued, you will retain all inherited assets. Furthermore, in light of the evidence of fraud, I am awarding you half of all marital property acquired during the marriage. Elias's jaw dropped. But, Your Honor, the prenuptial agreement is void. Fraud and failure to disclose material facts render it invalid. Therefore, Mrs. Naomi will receive half of the house, half of the investments, and half of every marital asset. I sat frozen in disbelief, my hands trembling. Veronica squeezed my fingers gently, whispering, You did it. Across the courtroom, Elias looked pale and defeated, his perfect world crumbling right in front of everyone. For the first time in months, I finally felt free. Judge Helena wasn't finished yet. Furthermore, she said, her tone firm and steady, Mr. Elias Crest is hereby ordered to pay Mrs. Naomi Crest's legal fees and all court costs associated with this case. The sound of the gavel echoed through the courtroom, final, powerful, and freeing. When we stepped out into the crisp September air, the weight of years seemed to lift off my shoulders. I walked across the parking lot toward my car, the wind brushing through my hair. Suddenly, I heard his voice. Naomi, wait! I turned to see Elias hurrying after me, his tie loosened, his face a mix of anger and desperation. We need to talk, he said breathlessly. This is all a big misunderstanding. I stopped, standing tall. For the first time in 2 years, I felt completely in control. No, Elias, I said calmly. The misunderstanding was mine. I thought you loved me. I did love you. I still do, he stammered. I shook my head slowly. You loved the idea of taking everything I had. You loved feeling superior. You loved having someone you could manipulate and control. That's not true, he insisted, his voice cracking. I heard you, Elias. I heard your phone call, how you bragged about how easy I was to control, and how you deserved an award for pretending to love someone so boring and ordinary." His face went pale, his lips parting in shock. You you were listening?" I nodded. I came home that night excited to share some good news with my husband. Instead, I found out that my husband was nothing but a liar. Elias stepped closer and grabbed my arm. "Naomi, please. We can fix this. I made mistakes, but I can change. We can start over." I pulled my arm free and looked him in the eye. "You spent 2 years tearing me down, making me feel worthless, making me think I should be grateful anyone wanted me. You reminded me at every turn that I came from nothing." "I was wrong about that," he said desperately. "I see that now." "You were wrong about everything," I replied quietly. "You were wrong about my father, wrong about me, and wrong about what really matters in life." I started walking toward my car, then paused and turned back to face him one last time. "Oh, and Elias," I said softly, "that boring, ordinary teacher you married, she's worth more than you'll ever be. And I'm not talking about money." He stood frozen as I got into my car, his expression hollow. For the first time, I didn't feel anger or pity, just peace. He had taught me something valuable, that I'd been seeking validation from the wrong people. For years, I'd been trying to prove I was lovable, forgetting that I already was. My father had always known that. He spent his life quietly working hard, saving money, and planning for my future, not because he thought I was weak, but because he knew I was strong enough to face whatever came my way. I remembered what Veronica had told me that day when we uncovered the trust. "Naomi," she said gently, "your father lived modestly, but invested wisely. He planned ahead for you. There's a letter attached to the trust documents. He wanted to make sure you'd always be cared for if anything ever happened to him." Her eyes softened as she continued. "There's more. Your father apparently suspected that anyone you married might one day try to take advantage of you. The trust was designed so it could only be accessed by you, and only after your 30th birthday or in the event of a divorce." I whispered, stunned. He knew. He wanted to protect me. "Yes," Veronica said, smiling sadly. "The trust clearly states that the assets are separate from any marital property. Your husband has no claim to them." Tears filled my eyes that day, not from sorrow, but from overwhelming gratitude. My father, even in death, was still looking out for me. "Veronica," I asked then, "does Elias know any of this?" "Not unless you told him. And from what you've described, I doubt he has any idea what your father's land is truly worth." The irony wasn't lost on me. Elias had married me thinking I was just a naive schoolteacher, someone he could easily manipulate. But instead, he had married the daughter of a man who had spent decades quietly building wealth, protecting his family, and believing in his child. My father had been the smartest man I had ever known. He understood that true wealth isn't about showing off or making others feel small. It's about security, wisdom, and the ability to care for others. And I realized something even deeper. Sometimes the people who underestimate us the most become the very reason we rise higher than we ever thought possible. But real victory doesn't come from proving them wrong. It comes from finally knowing your own worth. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done differently? Would you have walked away forever or given Elias a second chance? Do you believe people like Elias ever truly change, or they only regret losing control? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Before you go, please don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new inspiring story every single week. Remember to give this video a like and share it with someone who deserves to hear a truly powerful story. Stay tuned, and when you're done here, explore other captivating stories on the channel, each one filled with real-life lessons and crafted to remind you of your true worth and strength. Thank you so much for watching.